Welcome to Life Unravelled, where we unravel life's little mysteries. Today we're looking at how talking and speaking affects our ability to read. Yeah, it seems a little bit strange that that's going to happen, but really what we do is when we first are babies, we start by listening to our environment around us and we understand what's happening around us. And then we start to verbalise and start to interact with our environment. Dad, 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 dad. Mum, 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 mum. And we, as babies, we start to explore all the different sounds our mouths can make. And then from speaking and talking, we then start to look at the written word. So it's really important that the children have a good understanding of their speaking and of their talking and how English is actually all put together. And that's all developed in those early years when we first start talking. Let's look at the vocabulary development. The more that you read to your children and the more that you speak to your children in a correct way and using quite complex words means that they then build up this big vocabulary. Have you ever heard a little one that will say, "That's not appropriate"? And that's because all the time you've actually said appropriate to them. And what's really lovely is that they take these words and they understand the meaning because of the context that you're using with them. Now, it has been proven that the more words that the children know, the better academic performance they have later on. So don't choose very, very simple words all the time to the kids. They actually understand the meanings behind the words in the context that you're saying it. So, for instance, I used to say to my children, "That is not appropriate," rather than "that's naughty." And they knew appropriate meant, or not appropriate meant that they shouldn't do it, and appropriate meant that it was okay. And they've come back to me and said that when they were tiny little tots and everyone was laughing at it. There's no reason why you need to use simple language with kids. So build their vocab. Make sure that you use quite complex words in the correct context so that they can understand the meaning. The other way that you can build vocab is by in your books, looking at the books that you're reading. So for instance, when they're tiny and you're reading one of my favourite books, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, and on Monday he ate a red apple, make sure that you can start to add vocab to that. Oh, have you seen an apple? Have you seen a pear? Have you seen an orange? Oh, this orange isn't as bright. Or this red apple, oh, this looks a little bit pink. It's not red, or it's rosy. And so you start to develop these words that they develop an understanding of the vocab that you're using. Now, for instance, when you start moving to more complex books, such as Wombat Stew, you can see on this page that the language that they're using is, "I'm brewing up a gooey, chewy stew with that fat wombat," replied Dingo with a toothy grin. So if you have a look at that and you've got "Platypus came ambling up the bank," they're using more complex words, and those words you need to explain to the kids the first time that you do it. And then how about start using those words when you're walking around? So for instance, "Platypus came ambling up the bank," and explain that ambling is slowly moving. And then when you're walking around the shops, you can say, "Oh, Sarah, you're ambling along there," so that they get a really good understanding of those words, and their vocab then builds more and more. And the more vocab that they have with their speaking and their talking, the better their reading vocab will be later, because they can guess those words just by looking at the first 3 or 4 letters and the end letters. And that's really important with their reading. So I hope that gives you a bit of an idea with the vocab development with reading books and talking about the definitions of words, getting them to understand that. So let's go on to the next one. Museums, art galleries, science centres and zoos. Oh, look, these places are filled with the written word, but it's also filled with heaps of knowledge and heaps of information. And there will be lots of different vocab words that they wouldn't normally be exposed to in their everyday life. So for instance, when you're going and having a look at some of the animals at the zoo and they've got a plaque in front of them, you can then read that out to them. There'll be words like Africa and Asia and Australia. Well, they know where Australia is, but did they know that Africa and Australia were places around the world over the sea? And it's great for them to get that understanding of whereabouts they are in the world. And that launches a whole new topic that you can then talk to them about. Or maybe on there it had about a venomous snake. Now, what is venomous? So then they can start using the word venomous and what animals are venomous, and they like then to hone in on one word and really use it and explore it and try and use it in all different sorts of contexts. And it's really lovely to see these children grow. Their looks on their faces when they discover something new is something so precious that you'll never ever forget it. So make sure you go to the zoos, the museums, even the art galleries are really lovely to go and talk about the different colours or maybe the different scenes. Have they ever seen a scene like that before? Or even the different dresses. And it's important to pick out that detail so that the children start to look for that detail when they're going around and when they're just doing their everyday life, because looking at detail is an important part of academic success. So now that we've covered the museums and we've covered the vocab, we have one last part to go. Now what we're going to talk about is to refer known content while reading the book. So for instance, if you're reading a book on the Very Hungry Caterpillar, you can talk to them about the apple and how do you think it tasted to the little caterpillar eating the apple, and do you think he really liked the pear, and was the pear mushy or was it crunchy? And you can start to talk about those things, that they've eaten a pear and they've eaten an apple, and maybe even go and get one so that they can relate the words that they have on the page to the actual physical real life situation. And by relating that to your real life situation, what then happens is that they can then use those words. Oh, could I please have a crunchy apple? Or could I please have a soft apple? And they can start using those definitions and those new vocab words in their everyday life. But that even goes as far as to say that if you're reading, say for instance, Giraffes Can't Dance, and throughout there they've got words like a beautiful and whispered. Well, you could use those words like beautiful and whispered in your everyday life, and then they will have a better understanding of what is said in the book. So I hope this gives you a good overall picture of what you need to do to develop the vocab. It's really, really important that you use lots and lots of words and that the children build a really good, solid vocab understanding, and that will help them so much in their reading and in their academic achievement. The next part of speaking and talking I'd like to talk about is social language, and that's what is appropriate for us to say and do. Specifically, we're talking about speaking and talking. So what are the appropriate words that we need to use when we are talking to people? For instance, please and thank you are two words that are really important to teach the kids. Now, it should take them around about a year to really understand when to use those words and when not to use them. So you're going to have to remind them lots and lots of times. You'll feel like you're nagging, but you're not. They need to understand the social language, and that's what we're talking about, those please, thank you, even excuse me. Now, they'll forget to use excuse me all the time, but it's important that every single time that you are consistent and that you say, oh, what should you be saying? Excuse me, mummy, or excuse me, daddy. And then they start to get an understanding that they need to say that. The more you say it to them, the better their understanding will be. And then their brain will move that excuse me type language into hard wiring, and they will have instant access to it. And the next thing that you need to teach them is for them to express themselves as far as how they're feeling. I feel angry, I feel tired, I feel happy. They don't know what those words mean, angry, tired, happy. So you need to help them to understand how they're feeling. And sometimes you don't just want to use angry. You might want to use angry or frustrated, or you might want to start using more complex language with them so that they understand that there are varying degrees of angry, there are varying degrees of happy. There's excited and there's happy, and there's so many different ways to describe it. And it's the more adjectives, the more adverbs that we use, the describing words that we use with our kids, and enable them to actually be able to articulate those words to us. Makes our life a lot easier, and it makes their life a lot easier. It means that when they're with other people, they can express how they feel and what's happening around them in a more articulate way. The more articulate that they are, the easier it is for them to read. Isn't it amazing? So the more we speak to our children, the more we talk with our kids, the better prepared they're going to be for reading. Now, just quickly, we're nearly finished. We're going to talk about phonetic knowledge and grammar. So phonetic knowledge is understanding how the words are put together. Cat, at. What can you hear? What sounds can you hear? And what we want to do is we want the kids to be able to break up our words. They need to be able to clap the syllables. Comforting, or apple, orange. So they need to know what the syllables are. They also need to know what the sounds are that are made. Ch, air, chair, and how that we can slide them all together. Now, the sooner that you start introducing that, the easier it is for them to understand it and to be able to apply it to all words. Now, you can help this by role-playing and by using the correct grammar when you're talking with them. But one of the best ways is when they do role-playing games. So they pretend that they're a train driver, and they're chugging along, or they pretend that they're a mother, or you can watch them and they'll do heaps of pretend play. What's really nice is if you start to join in, and you can then develop their language from there just by playing with them and using the correct words that you want them to learn. What's also lovely is when older children play with little ones and they teach them different words and the different vocab. And it's that interaction between the adult and the child, or the child, older child and the younger child, that builds a great rapport between the families and between cousins and between friends. And it's that family time that really supports the kids in their learning for the rest of their lives, really. So I hope you've learnt a heap today about speaking and talking, and the importance of using lots of vocabulary, having correct grammar when you're speaking with your child, and how to develop their vocab in a whole heap of different ways. Look forward to seeing you again on the next video. Bye.